The daughter, already in the car, saw the scene in the rearview mirror. The bull now wasn't looking at the elderly woman. Its dark, deep eyes were fixed on her. With a low bellow that made the ground vibrate, the colossal animal positioned itself in the middle of the dirt road, a living wall of muscle and contained fury. The villainess slammed on the accelerator, but it was useless. The one-ton bull, the unexpected guardian, blocked her path, an insurmountable barrier between her and her escape. Fate, after all, had decided to intervene. Panic chilled Sophia's blood. It wasn't possible. An animal, a bull, blocking her way. That was her money, her freedom, her new life. She pressed the accelerator harder. The SUV's engine roared in protest, kicking up a cloud of red dust that swallowed the view in the rearview mirror. The blind, elderly woman, the mother she had just abandoned, disappeared into the curtain of dirt. But the bull remained. A dark, impenetrable mass, sharp horns pointed skyward, eyes fixed on her. Sophia cursed, a hoarse, desperate sound. What the hell was that? A nightmare? Was she dreaming? No. The smell of dust and the tremor of the engine were too real. She attempted a maneuver, sharply turning the steering wheel to the right, aiming for the edge of the dirt road. Perhaps there was enough space to get around the beast. The SUV swayed dangerously, its wheels skidding on the loose earth. But the bull, with surprising agility for its size, took a lateral step, muscles rippling under its dark hide, and blocked the new route. It was as if it anticipated her every move. A shiver ran down Sophia's spine. This was no ordinary animal. There was an intention in those eyes, a cold determination that made her tremble. She tried the left. The car shrieked, almost tumbling into the ditch bordering the road. Once again, the bull moved, a wall of flesh and bone. Impassive, it wasn't just a barrier, it was a guardian, and Sophia was the prisoner. Rage bubbled within her, replacing fear for an instant. What audacity! After everything she had done, all the risks she had taken to get that money, to get rid of that life and that woman. Now, a bull. She honked the horn, a shrill, piercing sound that echoed across the silent vastness of the field. The animal didn't even blink. It merely let out a heavy snort, hot smoke steaming from its nostrils, and scraped one of its front hooves on the ground, a clear warning. Sophia swallowed hard. The money in the back seat, the suitcase crammed with bills, seemed to mock her, so close yet so far. She looked in the rearview mirror again. The dust had settled a little. There she was, the mother's hunched figure, still near the barbed wire, now free but disoriented. The sight of the elderly woman, blind and alone, should have stirred some guilt, but in Sophia it only ignited more fury. It was her fault for being a burden for so long. It was her fault for getting caught. "Get out of the way, you stupid animal!" she screamed, pounding the steering wheel. The bull responded with a low grunt, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, and took a slow step forward, further narrowing the distance between itself and the car. Its colossal head, with imposing horns, was now just a few feet from the bumper. Sophia could see the texture of its hide, the raw power contained in every muscle fiber. She felt sweat trickle down her forehead. The car's air conditioning seemed to have stopped working. The smell of earth, of animal, and of her own fear filled the cabin. She couldn't go back. Going back meant facing her mother, the police, prison. It meant losing everything. And she wouldn't lose. Not after tearing her mother's dress on the barbed wire, feeling the old woman's flesh catch as she pulled, desperate to break free. That moment, the cold cruelty of her decision, was still vivid in her mind. With a final flicker of desperation, Sophia shifted into reverse. The car lurched backward. She needed space, needed momentum. Perhaps, if she gained speed, she could run over the bull, force it out of the way. The idea was insane, but panic was blinding her to reason. She looked back. Her mother was just a distant speck. The road behind seemed empty. She accelerated, the car gaining speed on the dirt. The bull, however, was not a static obstacle. It watched, head slightly tilted, dark eyes following every movement of the SUV. When Sophia shifted into first gear again and floored it, aiming for the center of the dark mass, the bull reacted. It didn't flee, it didn't move aside. Instead, it lowered its head, horns pointed at the car, and took a firm step forward, like a gladiator preparing for combat. The collision was inevitable. The impact was not what Sophia expected. It wasn't the sound of crumpled metal against flesh, but a dull thud, as if the car had hit a mountain. The SUV shook violently, airbags exploding with a deafening force, blinding her for an instant. The smell of gunpowder and burnt rubber filled the car. She felt her body hurled forward, the seatbelt tightening painfully. As the airbag smoke began to dissipate, Sophia blinked, her head throbbing. The car's front bumper was completely crumpled, the hood dented and smoking. The bull, for its part, was still there, intact. It had absorbed the impact as if it were a mere shove. Now it was even closer, head lowered, horns scraping the car's ruined hood. A deep, menacing roar of fury vibrated through the twisted metal. Sophia was trapped. The car, her means of escape, was destroyed, and the one-ton guardian seemed to have no intention of letting her go. The air inside the SUV was thick with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and airbag dust. Sophia, dazed, tried to breathe, but each inhalation seemed to scrape her throat. Her head throbbed, a dull ache spreading behind her eyes. She blinked, trying to clear her blurred vision. The front bumper, once gleaming, was now a twisted mass of metal pushed into the hood, which smoked like a wounded dragon. The silenced engine let out a sharp hiss, a lament of mechanical death. And there, inches from the driver's window, was the bull. Its eyes, once distant, were now deep black pits fixed on her with an intensity that chilled her soul. Its colossal head was lowered, thick, sharp horns scraping the crumpled metal of the hood, a chilling sound that seemed to echo inside her own head. The roar it let out, deep and primal, was not just a sound, it was a vibration that ran through the car's chassis, making Sophia's teeth chatter. It was a declaration, a sentence. The panic, which had been a cold wave, was now a tsunami engulfing her. The car, her sanctuary, her fortress, her escape route, was destroyed, and the one-ton guardian seemed to have no intention of letting her go. She was trapped, completely trapped. Sophia tried to open the door, but the impact had jammed it. She pulled the handle hard, once, twice, 3 times, her fingers slipping on cold sweat. Nothing. The door was sealed, an insurmountable barrier between her and freedom. She looked to the other side, at the passenger door. Perhaps. But the bull was there, imposing, its muscles rippling under its dark hide. It seemed to have anticipated her movement, turning its head slightly, eyes unblinking. The suitcase of money in the back seat, the reason for all this madness, now seemed a heavy burden, an anchor chaining her to her fate. She looked at it, at the stacks of bills that represented her new life, her freedom. Now they were just paper, worthless. A distant sound, a faint moan, broke the tense silence. It was her mother, the blind, elderly woman, abandoned at the barbed wire, now free, but still alone. Guilt, which Sophia had suppressed so fiercely, threatened to surface, but was quickly crushed by fury and fear. It wasn't her fault. It was the old woman's fault for being a hindrance. It was that stupid animal's fault for being there. "Get out of the way!" she screamed again, her voice hoarse and trembling, pounding on the window glass. The bull didn't move. It merely snorted, hot vapor fogging the glass. Its sharp, menacing horns were now inches from her face, reflecting the setting sun. She could feel the warmth of its breath through the glass. With a slow, deliberate movement, the bull lowered its head further, and one of its horns, with terrifying precision, scraped the side of the hood, tearing off a piece of twisted metal. The sound of tearing metal was deafening. Sophia cringed, eyes wide. It wasn't just blocking, it was attacking. It was dismantling her car, piece by piece. The animal then took a step back, only to reposition itself differently. With a deep grunt, it charged the side of the car, not with full force, but with a calculated shove. The already damaged SUV groaned and swayed dangerously, the driver's door denting further. Sophia was thrown against the dashboard, the seatbelt tightening her again. Fear gave way to icy despair. She couldn't stay there. The car was becoming a death trap. But where to go? The bull was everywhere. It was the road, the field, the horizon. She looked at the internal rearview mirror, broken and hanging by a thread. Her mother's figure was now almost invisible, but the image of the barbed wire, the torn dress, the old woman's flesh caught in the metal as she pulled, desperate to escape, flashed in her mind. That act of cruelty, so vivid, now seemed to have summoned her own executioner. The bull gave another shove, this time harder, against the passenger door. The glass cracked, a web of fissures spreading across the surface. Sophia screamed, uncovering her head with her arms. Fragments of glass fell onto the seat. It was trying to crush the car, crush her along with it. She needed to get out, now. But how? The only exit seemed to be the driver's side, where the bull was closest. It was a suicidal gamble, but staying there was a slow death sentence. With trembling hands, Sophia fumbled in the center console, searching for something, anything. Her fingers found the cold weight of a Swiss Army knife she kept for emergencies. It was small, pathetic, but it was something. She looked at the bull, which was now scraping its horns against the car's roof, the metal groaning under the pressure. Its dark eyes seemed to gleam with a cold, almost human intelligence. It wasn't acting on blind instinct. There was a purpose in every movement, a deadly patience. Sophia gripped the knife in her hand, the cold metal against her sweaty palm. One last chance. One last attempt to escape the fate she herself had forged. She needed to get out of the car, run, no matter where, as long as it was away from that relentless guardian and the mother she had betrayed. The field stretched around her, vast and desolate, but at that moment it seemed her only hope. She took a deep breath, the smell of burnt metal and earth filling her lungs. Adrenaline surged through her veins. It was her or the bull, and she was not willing to lose. The Swiss Army knife, tiny and ineffective against the mountain of flesh and horns outside, was the only thing between Sophia and absolute despair. Her fingers squeezed the cold metal, the blade still retracted as the bull continued its methodical attack. The grinding of metal on the car's roof was an infernal sound. With each scrape of its horns, a new dent, a new hole opened in the bodywork. It wasn't just blocking, it was dismantling her refuge, transforming it into a crushing cage. The animal's dark eyes, fixed on her through the cracked glass, seemed to penetrate her soul, revealing every layer of her selfishness and cruelty. It wasn't the blind fury of a wild animal, but a cold, almost vengeful intelligence that guided every movement. It knew what she had done. The image of her mother, blind and helpless, caught in the barbed wire, her dress torn, her skin scratched, flashed in Sophia's mind. That act, so calculated, so inhumane, seemed to have summoned her own executioner, a one-ton judge. The smell of burnt rubber and twisted metal was suffocating, mixing with the earthy odor of the bull and the cold sweat of Sophia's fear. She needed to get out. The car was no longer a protection, but a potential tomb. The driver's door was jammed, and the passenger door, with its cracked glass, was an easy target for the next attack. With an uncontrollable tremor, Sophia opened the knife's blade. It was a butter knife against a tank, but it was all she had. She looked at the driver's window glass, the only surface that seemed less damaged, yet still sealed. The bull, as if reading her thoughts, gave another shove against the passenger door, and the already compromised glass cracked with a sharp sound, giving way in a shower of small fragments that scattered across the seat and floor. Sophia screamed, covering her face with her arms, feeling the impact of the shards on her skin. The bull snorted, and the hot vapor of its breath invaded the cabin, bringing with it the strong animal smell. It had opened a gap, an opening, but to where? The bull's colossal head was now inches from the opening, its eyes black as obsidian. Panic gave way to desperate determination. She couldn't stay there to be crushed. With a sudden movement, Sophia turned to the back seat, where the suitcase of money, the reason for all her hell, lay untouched. For an instant, greed overshadowed fear. She stretched out her hand, trying to reach it, but the bull, with surprising speed for its size, thrust one of its horns through the broken window, scraping the car's roof and blocking access to the suitcase. It was as if it knew, as if it were protecting not only the mother, but also what she had stolen. "No!" Sophia screamed, recoiling. The horn, sharp as a spear, was now pointed directly at her. She cringed against the steering wheel, the knife still clutched in her hand. Adrenaline surged through her veins, a mix of terror and fury. She wouldn't lose. Not after everything. Not after tearing her mother's dress, feeling the old woman's flesh catch in the metal as she pulled, desperate to break free. That memory, the cold cruelty of her decision, was a constant reminder of what she was capable of. With a scream of rage and despair, Sophia used the knife to try and force open the driver's door, jamming the blade into the gap between the door and the frame, trying to pry it open. The metal groaned, but the door wouldn't budge. The impact had deformed it so badly that it was sealed shut. She pulled with all her might, her arm muscles trembling, sweat streaming down her face. Nothing. The bull, observing her movements, withdrew its horn from the broken window and, with a slow, deliberate movement, repositioned itself in front of the already cracked windshield. It lowered its head, and with a deep roar that made the car vibrate, charged the glass with its forehead. The windshield exploded into 1,000 pieces, a shower of shards flying into the car. Sophia screamed, covering her face again, feeling the cut of small fragments on her skin. The bull, now with its head partially inside the car, snorted, its black eyes fixed on her. The smell of its hot, damp breath was nauseating. It was invading her space, her last barrier. There was nowhere left to go, nowhere left to hide. The car was open, destroyed, and the bull was there, a massive, relentless presence. The only option was to get out. It was a suicidal gamble, but staying there was a certainty of death. With a last flicker of courage born of panic, Sophia threw the knife onto the passenger seat, useless against such force. She needed to be quick. She needed a plan. The bull had its head partially inside the car, its horns menacingly close. This was her chance. With a primal scream, Sophia lunged for the driver's door, not to open it, but to try to crawl through the window, which was intact, but the glass was rolled down. It was a tight squeeze, but it was the only escape route that didn't put her directly in the bull's line of fire. She forced her body through, her shoulders scraping the metal frame, her clothes tearing. The bull reacted instantly, withdrawing its head from the car and turning to the driver's side. It wouldn't let her escape. Its eyes, previously only menacing, now burned with renewed fury. It took a step forward, narrowing the distance between itself and the window. Sophia felt panic constrict her throat. She was caught halfway, half in, half out of the car, vulnerable. The bull lowered its head, and one of its horns, with terrifying precision, scraped the side of the car, inches from her face. She felt the wind of its movement, the warmth of the animal's hide. Time seemed to slow. She could see the rough texture of the horn, the raw power behind it. With a final effort, a scream of despair that tore through her throat, Sophia managed to squeeze out, falling awkwardly onto the dusty ground. She rolled, scrambling to her feet, eyes wide, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. She was free of the car, but not of the bull. It was there, a few feet away, its colossal head swaying slowly from side to side, horns pointed at her. The air was thick with menace. The field stretched around, vast and desolate, but there was nowhere to run. The bull was the road, the field, the horizon. And it seemed to have no intention of letting her go. Her mother's figure, now an almost invisible speck on the horizon, seemed to float like a ghost, a silent reminder of the debt Sophia was about to pay. The dust raised by her fall had not yet settled when Sophia found herself on her feet, swaying, her body aching, breath caught in her throat. The air, previously a mix of burnt metal and sweat, was now purely the smell of dry earth and the bull's strong animal odor. She was out of the car, yes, but freedom was a cruel illusion. The bull, a few feet away, was the undeniable reality. Its colossal head swayed slowly from side to side. Horns sharp as reapers' blades pointed directly at her. There was no uncontrolled fury in its black eyes, but a disturbing calm, an implacable certainty. It was the calm of a judge who had already passed sentence. Sophia tried to run. Her feet, once so agile in her calculated escape, now felt heavy, glued to the ground. She took a hesitant step to the right, hoping to get around the animal, to find a gap in the vast field that stretched around. But the bull, with surprising agility for its size, moved too, a wide, deliberate step blocking her path. She tried to the left, and it mirrored her movement. It was a macabre dance where every escape attempt was anticipated, every hope crushed before it even bloomed. The field, once a symbol of space and freedom, now revealed itself as an arena, and she, the cornered prey. The scorching midday sun punished her skin, sweat dripping down her face, mixing with dust and the blood from small cuts. Her clothes torn, her hair matted, she was the image of despair. The suitcase of money, the reason for all her hell, lay untouched in the back seat of the destroyed car, a cursed treasure that now seemed as distant as salvation itself. The bull, with its massive body, not only blocked her escape, but also guarded the car, guarded the money, guarded the proof of her betrayal. Every snort from the animal was a reminder of its imposing presence, every movement of its head, a silent threat. It didn't need to attack to terrorize. Its mere existence was a torment. The memory of her mother, blind and helpless, caught in the barbed wire, her dress torn, her skin scratched, flashed again in Sophia's mind. That act, so cruel, so inhumane, seemed to have summoned her own executioner, a one-ton judge who now demanded his tribute. She could feel the bull's gaze, not just on her body, but on her soul, as if it could read every selfish thought, every merciless decision that had led her there. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. She couldn't accept this, not after everything she had done to escape. She had planned every step, every lie, every act of cruelty. She couldn't be stopped by an animal. With a last flicker of fury and despair, Sophia looked at the horizon, at the dirt road that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was her only chance. She had to run faster than it, faster than her own fear. With a primal scream that tore through the silence of the field, Sophia turned and ran, not to the right, not to the left, but straight ahead, in the opposite direction from the bull, towards the illusory horizon. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, but she forced them, one after another, driven by terror. The dusty ground kicked up clouds with every step, and the merciless sun beat down on her back. She could feel the bull's gaze on her back, a heavy, oppressive presence. But the bull did not pursue her with the blind fury of a predator. Instead, it did something even more terrifying. With a slow, calculated movement, it turned, and with a deep roar that made the earth tremble, charged the already ruined car. Its horns, previously pointed at Sophia, now crashed against the twisted bodywork, tearing the metal with brutal force. It wasn't just blocking, it was destroying, dismantling any trace of her old life, any hope of return. Sophia stopped, panting, turning back, her heart pounding erratically. What was it doing? It wasn't chasing her, but it was destroying the car, the suitcase of money, everything she had risked to get. It was as if it knew that without the money, without the car, she would have nowhere to go, no way to escape. It was burning all her bridges, sealing her fate. The bull, with one last powerful shove, threw the car aside, revealing the dirt road now completely blocked by twisted wreckage and the animal's massive body. There was no more road, no more car, no more money. Her mother's figure, now an almost invisible speck on the horizon, seemed to float like a ghost, a silent reminder of the debt Sophia was about to pay. And the bull, imposing and unyielding, was the collector. It turned again, its black eyes fixed on her, and Sophia knew with a cold, paralyzing certainty that there was nowhere to run. The field stretched around, vast and desolate, but at that moment it was merely a prison without walls, and she was at its center, at the mercy of her relentless guardian. The air vibrated with the heavy silence that followed the final crash. Sophia stood still, panting, eyes wide, fixed on the smoking wreckage of what had once been her car, her escape ticket. The bull, imposing and unyielding, was there, blocking the road, a wall of flesh and fury. There was nowhere left to go, no way left to go. The money, the suitcase that was the essence of her betrayal, lay somewhere amidst the twisted metal, as unreachable as redemption itself. Her mother's figure, now an almost invisible speck on the horizon, seemed to float like a ghost, a silent reminder of the debt Sophia was about to pay. That distant point, once a mere obstacle to be left behind, was now a beacon of accusation, the origin of all her torment. The bull, for its part, was not just an animal. It was the embodiment of justice, the personification of every unshed tear, every ignored plea for help. Sophia felt the ground spin beneath her feet. The sun, previously just an annoyance, now felt like a relentless hammer pounding on her head. Her throat was dry, scratchy, and each breath was a painful effort. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse wheeze escaped her cracked lips. Panic, once a furious wave that propelled her, now transformed into a paralyzing stupor. She was trapped, not just physically, but in a web of her own choices. The bull, its black eyes fixed on her, did not move. It didn't charge, didn't snort in anger. It merely watched, like a judge awaiting the defendant's confession. It was a terrifying calm, more potent than any attack. It was the certainty that time was up, that the game was lost. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine, despite the scorching heat. It was as if the animal could see through her skin, through her bones, to the rot in her soul. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her voice failing. "Why are you doing this?" The question was absurd, directed at an animal, but it was the only one echoing in her mind. The bull tilted its head slightly, as if it understood, as if it were listening to the confession she had yet to utter. The smell of earth, sweat, and the strong animal odor filled the air, suffocating her. She took a step back, then another, instinctively seeking distance, even knowing there was nowhere to go. The field stretched around, vast and desolate, but every direction was a dead end. The road was blocked, the car destroyed, and the bull was the insurmountable barrier between her and any hope of escape. She was at the center of her own prison, without walls, but with a relentless guardian. Exhaustion began to take its toll. Her leg muscles trembled, her arms felt heavy, and her head throbbed. The adrenaline that had kept her moving for so long began to wane, leaving her vulnerable, weak. She felt dizzy, the world around her seeming blurred. The relentless sun drained her last strength. She fell to her knees, her hands sinking into the dry, warm earth, her eyes still fixed on the bull. Tears, long forgotten, began to roll down her dusty face, not of regret, but of pure frustration and despair. She had sacrificed everything, abandoned her mother, torn her dress, all for that money, for that illusory freedom. And now everything was lost, destroyed by an animal that seemed to have a divine mission. The bull finally took a step, slow, deliberate, then another. It wasn't a charge, it wasn't an attack, it was a gradual, inexorable approach. Each step was a heartbeat for Sophia, a death drum echoing in the silence of the field. It was closing in, not to kill her quickly, but to confront her, to ensure she understood the magnitude of her error. Sophia tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She was trapped, not just by the bull, but by her own weakness. The animal was a few feet away now, its colossal head swaying gently. She could see the rough texture of its hide, the gleam in its black eyes, the strength contained in every muscle. There was no more fighting, no more running. She closed her eyes, expecting the impact, the pain, the end. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt the bull's warm, damp breath on her face, a strong, earthy smell. It was there, right in front of her, its massive presence dominating everything. She slowly opened her eyes and saw the bull lower its head, not to gore her, but to gently push its muzzle against her shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of affection, but of imposition, of control. It was as if it were saying, "You're not going anywhere." Her mother, blind and helpless, caught in the barbed wire, seemed to be there, beside the bull, a silent witness. The torn dress, the scratched skin. Sophia felt a shiver. The bull wasn't there to kill her, not yet. It was there to make her feel, to make her witness her own ruin, to make her pay, in a way far crueler than death. It was the perfect punishment for the daughter who had abandoned her mother to the mercy of nature. The field, vast and desolate, was now the stage for her penance. The bull's warm breath on her face was a visceral reminder of its proximity, its inevitability. It wasn't a smell of fury, but of earth, of wildlife, of a primordial force that had cornered her. Sophia opened her eyes and the world spun. The animal's massive muzzle was there, inches away, its hide rough and dark like old leather, its fur short and dense. Its black eyes, deep and seemingly emotionless, stared at her. There was no anger in them, no bloodlust. There was only a cold observation, a patience that chilled the soul. It was the gaze of a guardian, of a jailer. She tried to pull away, but the gentle push of the muzzle against her shoulder was firm, unyielding. It wasn't violent, but it prevented any movement. It was a living barrier, a wall of flesh and bone that held her captive. The sun's heat continued to punish her, turning the air into an oven. Dust clung to her sweaty skin, and her throat scratched with every attempt to swallow. Thirst was an agony, a fire consuming her insides, but the deepest thirst was for hope, and that the bull seemed to have completely drained. The image of her mother, caught in the barbed wire, returned with brutal clarity. The torn dress, the scratched skin, the blind, lost gaze. Sophia had closed her eyes to that scene, had covered her ears to the pleas, had run away. Now the bull forced her to see, to feel, to experience a fraction of the helplessness she had inflicted. It didn't attack her, but immobilized her, subjected her to slow torture, a penance under the scorching sun. The bull snorted, a deep sound that vibrated in her chest, but it didn't move. It just kept pushing, holding her in place. Sophia was on her knees, hands dug into the dry earth, tears mixing with dust and sweat on her face. They weren't tears of remorse, not yet. They were tears of despair, of frustration, of an impotent rage against a fate that refused to bend to her will. She, Sophia, the rich daughter, accustomed to having everything, controlling everything, was now at the mercy of an animal, in a desolate field, with nothing. The suitcase of money, the object of her betrayal, lay somewhere amidst the twisted wreckage of the car. Unreachable, useless, the bull had not only cut the barbed wire to free her mother, but also all the ties that bound her to her old life of privilege and cruelty. It had destroyed her future, her past, and her present. With a slow, deliberate movement, the bull moved its muzzle from Sophia's shoulder. She felt a brief relief, a flicker of hope, but it was quickly crushed. The animal did not move away. Instead, it took a step to the side, then another, circling her slowly. It wasn't a threat of attack, but a macabre dance of control. Each step of the bull was an invisible boundary closing around her. The field, once vast and open, now seemed to shrink, transforming into a private arena for her punishment. Sophia tried to drag herself backward, but the bull stopped, blocking her path with its colossal body. It didn't need to use force. Its mere presence was enough to impose its will. It was herding her, like a guard dog, but with an intelligence and an intent that transcended animal instinct. It was guiding her, or rather, preventing her from going anywhere but the center of her own torment. The sun began to slowly descend on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of twilight was a cruel contrast to Sophia's despair. Night approached, and with it, the desert cold, the unknown sounds of the field, the dangers she had never faced. She, who had always slept on silk sheets, would now face a night under the stars, with the hard earth as her bed and a bull as her guardian. She looked at the bull, her eyes pleading. "What do you want from me?" She whispered, her voice almost inaudible, hoarse from dehydration and crying. The bull tilted its head as if it understood, and then, with a slow movement, pushed its muzzle towards the car's wreckage. There was no doubt in its intention. It wanted her to look at what she had lost, at what she had destroyed in her selfish pursuit. Sophia turned her head, her eyes clouded, to the smoking remains of the vehicle, twisted metal, shattered glass, torn tires. It was the image of her ruin, and amidst it all, she could glimpse a piece of green fabric, the lining of the money suitcase torn and exposed. The money, scattered, dirty, useless. There was no more value there, no more escape. The bull snorted again, this time with a sound that seemed almost a sigh of satisfaction. It had pushed her to the limit, confronted her with the consequences of her actions. And now, as darkness began to envelop the field, it slowly lay down, with a heavy thud that made the earth tremble. It wasn't moving away. It was preparing to spend the night there, blocking the road, guarding its prisoner. Sophia, exhausted, defeated, felt her body completely give out. She no longer had the strength to fight, nor to run. She was trapped under the watchful eye of her one-ton executioner. Her mother, a distant and almost forgotten speck on the horizon, was now a ghostly presence, an echo of her conscience. The bull was not just an animal, it was the mirror of her soul, the judge of her impiety. The night promised to be long, and the penance only just beginning. The earth trembled beneath Sophia as the bull lay down. It wasn't a gentle movement, but a heavy thud, a sonic warning of its permanence. For an instant, a flicker of hope sparked. Perhaps it would sleep, perhaps she could crawl away, escape in the imminent darkness. But hope was a breath, quickly extinguished by the sight of the animal's black eyes, which, even lying down, remained fixed on her, vigilant. Its colossal head rested on its front paws, but the bull's attention did not waver. It was a mountain of flesh and bone, a living fortress that blocked not only the road, but any path to freedom. The sun, A fiery disk on the horizon finally dipped, taking with it the last vestige of warmth. The air, previously scorching, began to cool rapidly, bringing with it a shiver that was not just from the cold, but from fear. Shadows lengthened, distorting the familiar shapes of the field, transforming them into menacing figures. The afternoon silence gave way to the sounds of the night, the buzzing of insects, the rustling of dry leaves in the wind, the distant howl of some predator. Each sound was a hammer pounding in her head, amplifying her vulnerability. Sophia tried to curl up, hugging her knees, seeking a warmth that didn't exist. Her torn dress, once a symbol of her escape, was now an inadequate garment, useless against the cold that penetrated her to the bone. Dust and dirt clung to her skin, and thirst was a constant torture, scratching her throat with every breath. She felt her body tremble uncontrollably, not only from the cold, but from the exhaustion and dread that consumed her. The bull's eyes glowed faintly in the growing gloom, like two burning embers. Its massive silhouette was an insurmountable barrier, a promise that the night would be long and escape impossible. Sophia tried to move, to drag herself a few inches away from the animal's gaze, but it merely snorted, a deep, grave sound that made her freeze. It wasn't a roar, but a clear warning. Don't try. Sophia's mind began to wander, a whirlwind of memories and regrets. Nights in her mansion, warm, safe, with silk sheets and the scent of lavender. Abundant food, fresh water, the absence of any worries. The contrast with her current reality was brutal, an icy stab to her soul. She, who had never felt hunger or cold, was now at the mercy of the elements, with a 1-ton bull as her jailer. The image of her mother, blind, fragile, caught in the barbed wire, returned with painful clarity. It was no longer a distant image, but a vivid, almost palpable presence. The torn dress, the same dress she had used to free herself, was now a constant reminder of her cruelty. Her mother had screamed, pleaded, and Sophia had run. Now she was trapped, not by barbed wire, but by an older, more relentless force. The bull, lying there, seemed to be the personification of justice, a silent and implacable judge. Darkness completely swallowed the field. The moon, a thin, pale slice, offered little light. Sophia was alone, or almost. The bull's presence was so overwhelming that she felt more isolated than ever. The earthy smell of the animal, previously suffocating, was now a constant, a reminder of its proximity. She could hear its slow, deep breathing, the rhythmic sound of a sleeping giant, yet always vigilant. The cold intensified. Sophia trembled so much her teeth chattered, her throat was raw, and her mouth dry as sand. She tried to swallow, but there was no saliva. Her head throbbed, and exhaustion pulled her towards a dangerous sleep, a sleep that would leave her even more vulnerable. But fear kept her awake, her eyes fixed on the bull's dark silhouette. She wondered what would happen when morning came. Would the bull let her go? Would it attack her, or would it keep her there, in an eternal penance under the sun and cold, until she withered away? The uncertainty was more terrifying than any attack. It was the torture of waiting, of powerlessness. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment and saw her mother's face, not the aged, blind face she had abandoned, but the young, smiling face of a mother who loved her unconditionally. A pang of something resembling remorse, or perhaps just a deep sadness, pierced her chest. It was a new, strange feeling, and it made her tremble even more. The bull did not move. It merely watched, a colossal shadow in the night. It needed no words, no explicit violence. Its mere existence, its imposing presence, was the punishment. Sophia was trapped, not just physically, but in a cycle of despair and forced reflection. The night would be long, the penance only just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt there was nothing money could buy to get her out of there. The night wore on, and each minute felt like a frozen eternity under the bull's unwavering gaze. Sophia, huddled on the dusty ground, felt her body tremble uncontrollably. It wasn't just the biting desert cold that penetrated her to the bone. It was fear, exhaustion, and a gnawing hunger that began to consume her insides. Her torn dress, once a symbol of her escape, was now a cruel reminder of her vulnerability, useless against the plummeting temperature. Her eyes, heavy and burning, tried to adjust to the darkness. But the bull's massive silhouette was the only constant, a mountain of flesh and bone that refused to disappear. The animal's eyes, two embers in the gloom, seemed to watch her with an intelligence that transcended instinct. It didn't move, didn't attack, but its mere presence was a silent torture, a promise that there would be no rest, no escape. Thirst was a constant agony, scratching her throat, turning her mouth into a private desert. She licked her cracked lips, but there was no moisture, only the bitter taste of dust and despair. Memories of fresh water, of iced juices, of crystal glasses with fine drinks assailed her mind, transforming into cruel ghosts that mocked her current misery. Sophia's mind, previously so focused on her selfish plan, was now a whirlwind of regrets and disturbing images. With every shiver she saw her mother's aged face, her blind eyes filled with dread, her pleading hands outstretched to her. The sound of her mother's screams, muffled by the wind and her own hasty escape, now echoed in her ears, louder and clearer than ever. She had torn her mother's dress, not just the fabric, but the dignity, the trust, the last bond of love that united them. The bull snorted, a deep grave sound that made her jump. It wasn't a threat, but a reminder, a punctuation mark in the symphony of her torment. It seemed to be the guardian of her conscience, the judge forcing her to confront every act of cruelty. The hours dragged on, each colder and longer than the last. Sophia tried to close her eyes, seeking sleep that might offer brief refuge, but the bull's image hovered behind her eyelids, and the slightest sound from the field made her wake in panic. She could hear the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant howl of a coyote. Sounds that in her previous life would have been ignored, but now were palpable threats in the darkness. Physical pain added to mental. Her muscles were stiff and sore from the car's impact and the uncomfortable position. Her head throbbed, and exhaustion pulled her towards an abyss. But fear, like an invisible whip, kept her in a state of agonizing alert. She felt like an insect caught in a web, watched by a giant spider in no hurry to consume her. The moon, a pale slice in the sky, began to descend, and the stars, once so bright, seemed to diminish, as if the universe itself was growing tired of her presence. Sophia looked at the sky, seeking a sign, a hope, but found only indifferent vastness. She remembered a time, as a child, when she had gotten lost in a shopping mall. The panic, the feeling of helplessness, the desperate crying until her mother found her. Now she was lost in a desolate field, with no one to find her, no one to save her from herself, and the person who had always saved her, she had abandoned. A solitary tear streamed down her dirty face, but this time it wasn't from anger or frustration. It was from a deep sadness, a bitter recognition of the truth. She had traded her mother's unconditional love for a wad of bills, and now the money lay scattered and useless among the wreckage, while she was trapped, stripped of everything. The bull, still lying down, let out a heavy sigh, almost a lament. It was a sound that seemed to echo her own despair. It wasn't just an animal. It was her punishment incarnate, an implacable mirror of her soul. The night promised to be long, and the penance only just beginning. And, for the first time in her life, Sophia felt there was nothing money could buy to get her out of there. Dawn began to announce itself, not with the promise of a new day, but with an even more biting cold that seemed to suck the very life from Sophia. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen and rough as sandpaper. Each breath was a painful effort, and the icy air burned her lungs. Her body, previously just trembling, now writhed in uncontrollable spasms, a desperate attempt to generate some warmth. She was exhausted, but sleep was an enemy, an invitation to vulnerability that the bull, with its unwavering vigilance, would not permit. The giant's eyes, once embers, now seemed deeper, reflecting the faint light of the stars that still clung to the opaque sky. It didn't move, but Sophia felt its gaze upon her, an invisible pressure that prevented her from fainting, from succumbing to the unconsciousness she so desired. It was as if the animal was there to ensure that every minute of her torment was fully felt, fully lived. Sophia's mind, previously a whirlwind of memories and regrets, now became a battlefield. The image of her mother, caught in the barbed wire, returned not as a memory, but as a vivid hallucination. She could hear the screams, feel the despair, the touch of pleading hands. The torn dress, the fabric she had ripped with such fury to free herself, was now a shroud of guilt, a veil that covered her vision and prevented her from seeing any future beyond that desolate field. She tried to drag herself, to move a few inches away from the bull's gaze, but her body wouldn't respond. Her muscles were cramping, her bones ached, and the slightest attempt to move was torture. The money, scattered among the car's wreckage, gleamed faintly under the dying starlight, a useless treasure, a cruel joke. She had risked everything, abandoned everything, for those pieces of paper that now were worth no more than the dust that covered them. A distant sound, the croaking of a frog, or the buzzing of a night insect, seemed amplified in the oppressive quiet. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the cold, but the feeling of being completely alone, completely at its mercy. She, who had always had a legion of servants, drivers, security guards, was now helpless, with a bull as her only companion and jailer. Her head throbbed and Sophia's vision began to blur. She blinked several times, trying to clear her eyes, but the shapes around her seemed to distort, dancing in the gloom. The bull, for an instant, seemed to grow, its silhouette towering until it filled the entire horizon, a dark and menacing mountain. She closed her eyes tightly, and when she opened them again, it was there, unchanged. But the sensation of its immensity persisted. Her throat was so dry it felt closed. She tried to swallow, but the effort was useless. Thirst was a torture that surpassed hunger, a burning fire within her. She remembered a crystal-clear water fountain in her mansion, glasses of ice water with lemon, a long, hot bath. Each memory was a stab, a vivid reminder of the paradise she had traded for a self-imposed hell. The bull snorted, louder this time, a sound that vibrated on the ground and made Sophia jump, despite her weakness. It raised its head slightly, and its horns, once instruments of liberation for her mother, now seemed weapons of her condemnation, pointing skyward like sharp needles. There was a dark majesty in the animal, an ancestral wisdom that Sophia couldn't comprehend, but which terrified her. She wondered if it would attack her, if it would crush her with its weight or impale her with its horns. But the bull did none of that. It merely watched, an infinite patience in its eyes, and that patience was more frightening than any attack. It was the certainty that she wouldn't escape, that her punishment wouldn't be swift but prolonged, a slow and agonizing confrontation with her own choices. The sky began to lighten, not with a vibrant sunrise, but with a pale, melancholic gray. The stars vanished one by one, and the bull's silhouette became more defined, more real, more imposing. It was no longer a shadow, but an overwhelming physical presence. The air remained cold, but the faint light revealed the extent of her misery, the destroyed car, the scattered money, the dust and dirt on her body, the torn dress, the solitude. Sophia felt a deep despair, a bottomless pit of sadness. She had been the queen of her own castle, and now she was a beggar in her own hell. The bull, the silent guardian, seemed to be the personification of everything she had lost, everything she had destroyed. It was justice, conscience, judge, and executioner, all in one being. And then, a sound. Not the howl of a coyote, nor the rustling of leaves. It was a distant sound, faint at first, but approaching. The sound of an engine. Sophia lifted her head, eyes wide, a spark of hope, or perhaps panic, igniting in her chest. Someone, rescue, or would it just be another element in her torture? The bull, which seemed to have been in a trance, moved its head, its eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. The penance perhaps was about to change form. The sound of the engine, faint at first, grew, tearing through the veil of the grey dawn. A spark of hope, as tenuous as the barely emerging light, ignited in Sophia's chest, but alongside hope, panic. Who would it be? A rescue or a new torment, perhaps the exposure of her cruelty. Her eyes, previously blurred by exhaustion and fear, now widened, fixed on the dirt road that snaked in the distance. Her heart pounded erratically, a frantic drum in her chest, echoing the growing rhythm of the engine. The bull, which seemed to have been in a trance of vigilance, moved its head, its deep, dark eyes fixed in the same direction as Sophia's, as if both awaited the verdict of an invisible judge. There was a strange synchronicity between predator and prey, between jailer and prisoner, united by the anticipation of what the morning would bring. In a few minutes, the silhouette of an old, rusty, noisy pickup truck appeared on the horizon. It coughed and sputtered, kicking up a cloud of reddish dust that seemed to dye the already opaque air. Sophia tried to scream, to call for help, but her throat was so dry and sore that only a hoarse whisper escaped her cracked lips. She waved her hand, a weak and desperate gesture, but the truck was still too far away to notice. The pickup truck slowed as it approached the bend, then stopped abruptly. The engine sputtered and died, leaving a deafening silence, broken only by the wind and Sophia's ragged breathing. A burly man, his face weathered by the sun and hands calloused, stepped out of the vehicle. He wore a crumpled straw hat and faded work clothes. His eyes, accustomed to the vastness of the field, swept the scene with a mix of curiosity and alarm. First, he saw the destroyed car, a twisted mass of metal and glass. Then, his eyes fell on Sophia, fallen and dirty, a pathetic figure amidst the wreckage. Finally, he noticed the bull. The black giant, imposing and motionless, completely blocking the road, its horns pointing skyward like ancient spears. The man frowned, an expression of perplexity on his face. A bull of that size, standing in the middle of the road, guarding an accident. That wasn't normal. Sophia tried to drag herself out of the car, closer to the man, but the bull let out a low snort, a sound that vibrated on the ground and made her recoil. It wasn't an attack, but a warning, a reminder of her place. The bull wouldn't allow her to escape so easily, nor to communicate without its permission. The man, who appeared to be a local farmer, took a hesitant step towards the car. "Hey, are you all right?" he shouted, his hoarse voice echoing in the morning quiet. What happened here? Sophia tried to answer, but the words tangled in her mouth. "Accident. The car. She stammered, her voice almost inaudible. She wanted to ask for help, to beg him to get her out of there, but the bull's gaze paralyzed her, and the money scattered on the ground, gleaming faintly, was silent proof of her guilt. The farmer took another step, his eyes scanning the scene. It was then he saw the bills, hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars scattered among the glass shards and dirt. He stopped, perplexity turning into suspicion. An accident, yes, but with so much money and a bull acting as a sentinel. "What's all this money?" he asked, his voice harder now. His eyes narrowed, assessing Sophia with a new gaze. She looked like a rich woman despite her deplorable state, and the scene made no sense. Sophia felt panic grow. She needed to invent a story, fast. It's mine. I was fleeing a robbery. They chased me and I lost control. The lie came out with difficulty, but it was the only thing she could think of. The farmer looked at the bull, then at the money, then at Sophia. He didn't seem convinced. "A bull doesn't chase robbers, miss," he murmured, almost to himself. He took a step towards the animal, trying to bypass it to get closer to Sophia. But the bull, with deliberate slowness, moved slightly, blocking his path again. Its eyes didn't leave Sophia, but its body prevented any approach. He's a farm bull," Sophia tried to explain, her voice louder now, desperate to sound normal. "Must have escaped. Please help me. I need to get out of here." The farmer hesitated. He was a countryman, accustomed to animals, but that bull was different. There was something in its posture, in its gaze, that made him recoil. He felt a strange reverence, almost fear, before that creature. He pulled an old cell phone from his pocket, an ancient model with an extended antenna. "I'm calling the police. This is too strange." Sophia felt a chill. The police. This was the end. They would discover everything. Her mother's abandonment, the money, the lie. "No, you don't need to. I just need a ride to the nearest town. I can pay very well," she said, pointing to the money with a trembling finger. The farmer looked at his phone, then at the bull, which seemed to observe every movement with a disturbing intelligence. He tried to dial, but the phone screen flashed, "No service." He snorted, frustrated. "Damn it, always happens around here." Sophia's hope withered as quickly as it had bloomed. She was even more trapped, now with a confused witness and an unyielding bull. The farmer, unable to call for help, seemed torn. He didn't want to leave an injured woman alone, but the bull prevented him from approaching, and the situation was too bizarre for his understanding. He looked at the car again, and his eyes fell on Sophia's dress, torn and dirty, and then on a small piece of fabric caught in the barbed wire just beyond the bull. A piece of fabric from an older dress, of a different but equally torn shade. A pang of curiosity, or perhaps suspicion, ignited in his eyes. That barbed wire seemed to have been cut, and the bull was right there in the middle of the road. The bull, as if sensing the farmer's gaze, let out a stronger snort, almost a growl. It didn't move, but its presence became even more oppressive, an insurmountable barrier between Sophia and any chance of escape or a convenient explanation. Sophia's penance had not ended. It had merely gained a new audience, and the threat of her truth being revealed hung in the air, denser and colder than the dawn itself. The farmer, a man of few words but great perception, did not avert his gaze from the barbed wire. His eyes, accustomed to reading the signs of the earth and deciphering the silent mysteries of animals, fixed on the two pieces of fabric. One, from the woman in front of him, dirty and modern, caught on the sharp points. The other, older, of a faded hue that evoked memories of a simpler time, also caught there, but on the cut ends of the wire, cut, not broken by accidental impact, but cut with a tool, and the bull, there, motionless, seemed like a bronze statue. But its eyes. Those eyes followed the farmer's every movement, every thought. A strange intuition, forged in years of living with wild nature, began to form in the man's mind. This was no ordinary accident. It was a choreographed scene, and the bull seemed to be the director, the guardian of a dark truth. Sophia, feeling the weight of the farmer's gaze, delving into every detail, desperately tried to divert attention. Her body trembled uncontrollably, and the cold of dawn seemed to penetrate her to the bone. "Sir, please." Her voice, now a thread of panic, tore through the silence. "I can explain everything. I was with my mother. She got lost in the darkness. I tried to help her, but the car overturned. The money was for her treatment, an emergency." The lie, hurried and poorly constructed, sounded hollow even to her own ears. She pointed to the scattered money, a pathetic attempt to lend credibility to her story. But the farmer kept his eyes on the wire and on the bull. He seemed to be assembling a macabre puzzle in his mind. The bull, as if understanding the farce, let out a longer snort, a sound not of anger, but of deep disapproval. It moved its head slightly, its horns pointing towards the fence, to the exact spot where the wire had been cut and where the older fabric was caught. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, but a silent invitation, almost an accusation. The farmer, a man of few words but great perception, felt the call. There was something more there, something the woman was hiding, and the bull seemed determined to reveal it. Ignoring Sophia, who was now babbling excuses and promises of money, the farmer took a step towards the fence. The bull did not stop him. Instead, it stepped back, opening a small corridor, as if allowing passage to the truth. Sophia screamed, "No, don't go there. It's dangerous. There are wild animals, snakes." Her despair was palpable, but the farmer was too intrigued to stop. He approached the wire, his eyes fixed on the torn fabric. He touched the metal, feeling the sharp points, the clean cut. That was not the result of an accident. That was intentional. And then he saw, not just the faint, almost imperceptible trail on the beaten earth, leading beyond the fence into the sparse brush. Not just the dark stain on the ground, near the wire, that looked like blood, but a little further on, among the dry bushes, a shape. A human shape, huddled, motionless. It was her, the mother, trapped, still trapped, not exactly in the wire, but just behind it, entangled in branches and the very fragility of her body. Her dress, the same faded shade as the fabric caught on the wire, was torn, exposing pale skin. Her eyes, though blind, seemed fixed on a distant point, an expression of helplessness frozen on her face. The farmer turned to Sophia, his eyes now filled with a grim understanding and unspeakable horror. "Your mother," he said, his voice low. Almost a whisper, but laden with a heavy accusation that echoed through the dawn. "You left her here, blind, alone." Sophia collapsed. The facade of lies, the pretense of innocence, all crumbled under the weight of the imminent truth. She could no longer meet the farmer's gaze, nor the bull's accusing silence. Words refused to come out. She merely shook her head, tears streaming down her dirty face, mixing with dust and shame. Despair was now pure, unadorned, terrifying in its rawness. She was exposed, naked before her own cruelty, and the world seemed to be crumbling around her. The farmer didn't wait for an answer. The trail, the blood, the bull, the woman's blatant lie, everything fit into a disturbing picture. He knew he needed to go beyond the fence, to check on the elderly woman's condition. He looked at the bull, which remained motionless, watching. There was a strange communication, a silent understanding. The bull was not a threat to him. It was a guide, an executor of primordial justice. With one last look at Sophia, who was now sobbing uncontrollably on the ground, the farmer passed through the cut wire. Entering the brush towards the motionless figure, the bull did not follow him. It remained on the road, an imposing barrier, ensuring Sophia could not flee. Its eyes, previously fixed on the farmer, now returned to Sophia's huddled figure. The penance was not yet over. The truth was being unearthed, and the villainess would be forced to witness every piece of it. The dawn air, previously cold and opaque, now seemed charged with an electrical tension, the prelude to a storm, forming not in the sky, but in Sophia's soul. Every step the farmer took into the brush was a hammer striking Sophia's conscience. She could imagine what he would find, the horror in his eyes, the condemnation in his voice. Her mother, blind, helpless, abandoned. The torn dress, the cold of the night, the solitude. The image of her mother, whom she had sworn to protect, now haunted her with brutal clarity. The money, which once seemed the key to her freedom, was now just a pile of worthless paper stained with guilt and despair. A scream, not from Sophia, but from the farmer. A scream of shock, of horror that echoed across the field and tore away Sophia's last veil of hope. He had found her. The truth, raw and stark, had been unearthed. The sound of the scream was the final sentence, confirmation that there was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. The bull, the silent guardian, had played its part. Justice, slow and relentless, had finally arrived. The farmer's cry was not a sound of surprise, but a guttural lament, laden with such deep repulsion that it made the dawn air vibrate. It wasn't just the shock of finding a body, but the implicit cruelty in the scene that struck him like lightning. The huddled figure among the dry bushes was, unquestionably, Sophia's mother. Her eyes, though blind, seemed open, fixed on emptiness, and her fragile body was entangled in thorny branches. Her faded dress torn in multiple places, exposing pale, scratched skin. There was a trickle of dried blood running from a cut on her forehead, and her thin, aged hands were clenched, as if still trying to grasp something that wasn't there. Sophia, prostrate on the ground, felt the scream pierce her chest like an ice pick. It was the sound of her condemnation, the confirmation that her truth, the most heinous truth, had been unearthed. Every fiber of her being contracted in paralyzing terror. Tears, previously of despair and anger, were now of pure dread, streaming down her dirty face, mixing with dust and shame that suffocated her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The image of her mother, whom she had abandoned to her fate, now materialized in the farmer's mind, and the guilt was an unbearable weight. The farmer, with a mix of fury and compassion, knelt beside the elderly woman. He touched her pulse with hesitant fingers, feeling the weak but present beat. She was alive, by a miracle. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a low, confused moan escaped. The night's cold had seeped into her bones, and dehydration was evident. He took off his thick coat and gently covered the woman's trembling body, trying to protect her from the relentless dew. His eyes swept the scene, noticing the drag marks on the earth, the signs of struggle, the torn pieces of fabric. Everything told a story of cruel and premeditated abandonment. The bull, the silent guardian, did not move from the road. Its eyes, previously fixed on the farmer, now returned to Sophia's huddled figure, as if ensuring she wouldn't dare to flee. Its presence was a wall of flesh and bone, an unbreakable barrier between the villainous and any hope of escape. The dawn air, previously cold and opaque, now seemed charged with an electrical tension, the prelude to a storm forming not in the sky, but in Sophia's soul. The farmer stood up, his dark eyes fixed on Sophia. There was no more confusion in his gaze, only a cold clarity and an unwavering condemnation. You left her here to die." His voice was a hoarse whisper, but each word was a blow, a hammer striking Sophia's conscience. Blind, helpless, trapped. He pointed to the cut barbed wire, to the piece of her mother's dress still caught there. A mute testimony to the brutality, and you tore her dress to escape. With the money... He gestured to the bills scattered on the ground near Sophia, which now seemed dirty, stained with the blood of her own cruelty. Sophia tried to speak, tried to stammer another lie, an excuse, but the words caught in her throat. Her body trembled uncontrollably, and the cold of dawn seemed to penetrate her to the bone. She could no longer meet the farmer's gaze, nor the bull's accusing silence. The facade of lies, the pretense of innocence, all crumbled under the weight of the imminent truth. She merely shook her head, tears streaming down her dirty face, mixing with dust and shame. Despair was now pure, unadorned, terrifying in its rawness. She was exposed, naked before her own cruelty, and the world seemed to be crumbling around her. The farmer didn't wait for an answer. There was no need. The trail, the blood, the bull, the woman's blatant lie, everything fit into a disturbing picture. He knew he needed help, not just for the elderly woman, but to deal with the situation. He tried his cell phone again, but the screen continued to flash, "No service." Frustration was palpable, but he wouldn't give up. He looked at Sophia's car, overturned and useless, then at the bull, which remained motionless, watching. There was a strange communication, a silent understanding. The bull was not a threat to him. It was a guide, an executor of primordial justice. With one last look at Sophia, who was now sobbing uncontrollably on the ground, the farmer made a decision. He couldn't leave the elderly woman alone, nor could he let Sophia escape. He turned and, with firm steps, began to walk down the road in the opposite direction from the town, hoping to find some sign of life, a neighboring farm, anything that could break the isolation of that place. He would take the elderly woman with him, if necessary. The dawn air, previously cold and opaque, now seemed charged with an electrical tension, the prelude to a storm forming not in the sky, but in Sophia's soul. Each step the farmer took, walking away, was a hammer striking Sophia's conscience, an echo resounding in the emptiness left by his departure. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in a long time, not with the calculated solitude of one who flees, but with the terrifying solitude of one abandoned to their fate, just as she had abandoned her mother. The bull, the silent guardian, did not move. Its dark and imposing mass remained on the road, a wall of flesh and bone, an unbreakable barrier between Sophia and any hope of escape. Its eyes, previously fixed on the farmer, now returned to Sophia's huddled figure, and in them there was no anger, no fury, only a cold, implacable observation. It was the gaze of primordial justice, of nature that witnesses and does not forgive. Every fiber of Sophia's being screamed to run, to hide, to disappear, but the bull was an anchor of dread, pinning her to the ground, to her guilt. The money, which once seemed the key to her freedom, was now just a pile of worthless paper scattered on the ground, stained with the dust of the road, and, in her tormented mind, with the blood of her own cruelty. The dirty green bills seemed to mock her, a tangible reminder of the price she had paid, and the price she would still pay. She had traded her mother's love, loyalty, her very life, for these pieces of paper. What cruel irony! The light of dawn began to tint the horizon, not with the soft, hopeful colors of a new day, but with a pale, merciless glow that exposed every detail of her misery. The overturned car, a twisted skeleton of metal, was a monument to her failed escape. The cut barbed wire with a piece of her mother's dress still caught was a scar on the landscape, a mute testimony to her barbarity. And she, Sophia, prostrate on the ground, her face dirty with tears and dust, was the personification of shame. Her mind, once so astute and calculating, was now a whirlwind of images and sounds. Her mother's faint moan, the cold touch of the wire, the sound of fabric tearing. She could feel the night's cold penetrating her bones, the burning thirst in her throat, the searing pain in her heart. It was the pain of guilt, a pain she had never allowed herself to feel, a pain that now consumed her from within. Despair was now pure, unadorned, terrifying in its rawness. She was exposed, naked before her own cruelty, and the world seemed to be crumbling around her. She tried to stand, her muscles protesting, stiff from cold and fear. But each movement was a Herculean effort, and the bull's gaze pinned her to the ground, as if its eyes were invisible chains. It didn't attack her, didn't threaten her with horns or kicks, but its mere presence was a greater threat than any physical assault. It was the threat of truth, of responsibility, of approaching justice. The silence was crushing. broken only by the wind whispering through the dry bushes and the accelerated beating of her own heart. She could hear blood pulsing in her ears, each beat a reminder that she was alive and that her penance was not yet over. Suddenly, a distant sound, an engine. Faint at first, almost inaudible but growing in intensity. Sophia froze, her swollen red eyes widened. The farmer had found help. That was the sound of the end, the sound of the law, the sound of inevitability. The bull, for its part, did not move, but its muscles contracted slightly, and its eyes, previously fixed on Sophia, now turned towards the road, in the direction from which the sound came. It seemed to know, it seemed to wait. The sunlight, now stronger, bathed the scene with brutal clarity. There were no more shadows to hide. The engine approached, the sound growing, transforming into a roar that filled the air. Sophia tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry, her voice lost in the abyss of her despair. She closed her eyes, wishing it was all a nightmare, that she could wake up and be back in her luxurious bed, far from that rural nightmare. But the smell of the earth, the cold of the ground, the sound of the engine, the imposing presence of the bull, everything was real. The bull took a step, a single step, slow and deliberate, positioning itself even more firmly in the middle of the road. Its horns, previously used to cut the wire, now seemed to point to the horizon, to the imminent arrival. It was not just a guardian, but a herald, a judge. Sophia opened her eyes, and what she saw was the bull, majestic and terrible, and in the background the dust raised by a rapidly approaching vehicle. The penance was not yet over, it was just beginning. Dawn brought not freedom, but the overwhelming weight of justice. She was trapped not just by the bull, but by the webs of her own cruel choices, and there was no escape. The sound of the engine was now deafening, and the figure of a car, or perhaps a truck, began to materialize around the bend in the road. The roar of the engine became thunder, swallowing the silence of the dawn and Sophia's last shred of hope. Dust rose on the horizon, and the silhouette of an old but robust pickup truck materialized quickly. It wasn't a police vehicle, nor an ambulance, but it seemed to carry the same authority, the same inevitability. At the wheel, the farmer, his face marked by worry and determination, and beside him, a younger man, serious-faced, probably a neighbor or farmhand, with a two-way radio in hand, already reporting the situation. Sophia felt the ground beneath her knees dissolve. Her eyes, previously fixed on the bull, now darted to the pickup truck that braked sharply a few feet away. The bull, a wall of flesh and bone, did not move. It remained unyielding, its eyes fixed on the villainous, as if its mission was not yet complete, as if it were the judge and jury, awaiting the final sentence. The pickup truck doors opened with a creak, and the farmer stepped out, followed by the younger man. Their gazes swept the scene, the overturned car, the cut barbed wire, the money scattered on the ground, and Sophia huddled, a pathetic figure of despair. But what impacted them most was the presence of the bull, which stood between Sophia and the road, a living and insurmountable barrier. "She's here," said the farmer, his voice grave without a hint of compassion. "And her mother. She's caught in the wire right over there." He pointed to the brush, and the younger man, with a look of horror, ran to check, while the farmer approached Sophia. She tried to stand, tried to flee, but her legs were weak, her body trembling uncontrollably. The bull took a step, a single step that was not a threat, but a containment, reaffirming its position. It was as if it was saying, "You're not going anywhere." "Why did you do this, Sophia?" asked the farmer, his voice a hoarse whisper of disbelief and revulsion. "How could you abandon your own mother, blind, helpless, to die in the cold?" The farmer's words were like knives, each one piercing the armor of denial Sophia desperately tried to maintain. She shook her head, tears streaming in dirty rivers down her face, mixing with dust and shame. There were no more lies, no more excuses. The truth, raw and brutal, was there, exposed for all to see. Suddenly, a sharp cry erupted from the brush. The younger man had found the elderly woman. "My God, she's alive, but she's very bad. We need urgent medical help." The sound of the man's cry, the confirmation of her mother's suffering, was the final blow for Sophia. A moan of despair escaped her lips, and she collapsed completely, sobbing uncontrollably on the ground. The money, which once seemed the key to her freedom, was now just a pile of worthless paper scattered around her, stained with guilt and despair. The farmer looked at the bull, and for an instant there was a silent understanding between them. The animal, who had been the guardian of justice, the herald of truth, seemed to nod. Its mission was accomplished. The villainess was exposed, the victim found. As the younger man ran back, already in contact with emergency services, the farmer knelt beside Sophia. "You will be held accountable for this, Sophia. The law will find you and your conscience. That will haunt you forever." The sound of sirens began to approach, still distant, but growing rapidly. The police and ambulance were on their way. Sophia's world, built on lies and greed, was about to collide with the harshest and most relentless reality. The bull, with one last look at Sophia, who was now being helped up by the farmer not to flee, but to be handed over to justice, took a step to the side. It no longer needed to block the road. Its work was done. With a slow and majestic movement, it turned and, without haste, walked into the brush, disappearing among the trees as silently as it had appeared. The sunlight, now full, bathed the scene with brutal clarity. There were no more shadows to hide. The farmer's pickup truck, the approaching sirens, Sophia's huddled figure, and the trail of destruction she had left behind. Everything was real. The penance was not yet over, it was just beginning, and the field, once the stage for unimaginable cruelty, now witnessed the slow but relentless unfolding of justice. Sophia would be taken away, her mother would be rescued and cared for, and the bull, nature's silent guardian, would return to its wild life, leaving behind the lesson that not every crime can be hidden, and that justice, sometimes, comes on horns and hooves, guided by a force greater than human greed. Dawn brought not freedom, but the overwhelming weight of justice, and Sophia was trapped, not just by the law, but by the webs of her own cruel choices, and there was no escape.